How's it going, everybody? You're listening to the Let's Talk podcast, the show that brings you the latest in relevant and current trends and conversations about our daily living, the Bible, and also some very fun and unexpected points of view. With your hosts, Joey Santos and Brad Wilson.
Okay, hey, Brad, we're back, man. Another week, another life here at Christ Church.
That sounds ominous right there. Another week, another life.
Another
Give it
week,
to the
another
Lord. Give it
life.
to the Lord.
Absolutely, man. You're back talking about community,
What we think.
and I just like pre-show here. I just stopped. You're just getting on. Started to get on fire here about Bengals.
I mean,
And I was like, stop talking because we got to talk about this when we talk about community.
Obviously, Detroit, the Lions. That's my number love. That's my first love, my number one. But man, I've been living in Cincinnati for practically half my life, maybe over half my life. So I've adopted the Bengals. I got nothing.
I'm not lying to you.
black and orange.
I'm not lying to my audience. I don't care for football.
Well,
I just don't.
That's the
So,
least
you
surprising
know,
thing you've said this
I'm
week.
honestly, I mean, based on our staff configuration right now when it comes to sports and football, I cannot wait for the Bengals to just lose soon so I can get my staff back. Do you know what I mean? So we can focus back on the Lord because that's the hard part. I mean, talk about getting on the way of the work of the Lord right here is Bengals.
Yeah. Well, rumor has it that Joe Burrow in the Hebrew stands for the Messiah. I don't know. I don't have a degree in it, but that's kind of what I've heard on the streets.
Oh, you probably heard a lot of amens going
Western
on right
Road.
now. There's a lot of amens going on right now.
Yeah.
People like that. But we're having a great conversation. I had to interrupt because it's like, man, we got to talk this in the podcast.
Yep.
Because we're talking about community. We're back at it. You're starting the sermon series resets. And we talk about community in the aspect of, being around people, building relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, but you talk about an interesting aspect of it. And full disclosure, you look at the guys in our staff, they go crazy about, the game's coming back. I want to buy my tickets. The desperation to be in the stadium in an opening game. And I know there's this whole thing about being in the stadium to see the team, about being with all the fans, right? So I think there's a real aspect of I want to be with my people. I want to be with my community of Bengals fans so I can cheer with them, so I can cry with them, so I can do all that fan stuff. That to me is a strong part of community. Like there's something in common. There's something that unites them. There's something that brings them together. And there's something that it doesn't matter who's on the next seat. They don't need to know them. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that a law like church?
Yeah. Or at least that's what church should be like.
Ooh, boom. Man, I dropped Mike right in the beginning.
I guess we'll just go now. Let's go get our preseason tickets.
Okay, go for it.
Go for what?
That's what church should look like.
Well,
So is church not like that? In your opinion, people are not devoted to church like they're devoted to their sports teams?
that's a sweeping statement, but I would say not. Some are more than others. I think some of it is my thinking with it is and we talked, this past Sunday we talked about resetting community. What we're kind of getting into this Sunday is we're talking about these expectations, and one of the things that just kind of jumped out to me is, and I think it highlights what you're saying is maybe in the past people used to go down to the Bengals game to I'm just going to go to the game. But now, like the thing I've noticed with our guys, like our producer, like he's not just going to the game, but it's something that he's a part of, like the environment, the atmosphere. And that makes it different. If you're like, okay, we're a part of what's going on. We're a part of they feel like the game part of the thing. And I think in church, there's a lot of people that do church, but I believe that God's expectations for us is He just doesn't want us to do church where we show up, we do our thing, but there's a difference in doing church versus being a part of it.
So we want a people from the church. Again, we talk about church and we just boil down to Sunday morning, right? That's
Right.
what we're talking about. So we talk about the people that come to church on a Sunday morning, and then we send them out, right? And we wanted them to be in these communities. We wanted them to be in those pockets. We wanted people to go to Bengals games. So this is not about choosing one
No.
against the other. This is about devotion, though. And if we're going to be, having a very open and honest conversation, the demonstration of devotion to one sometimes seems bigger than the other, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's hard to measure. People don't go to church to yell and cheer and do all the stuff like they do in the game. But I'm talking about motivation. I'm talking about what pulls you to that environment. And are those things present in your spiritual life to the point where I have the same feeling, I have the same motivation that pulls me to church. I want to be there. I cannot wait to be there. I want to be with my community. And if that's not happening, why do you think it's not happening? If that's happening, okay, great, we got there. But it doesn't seem to me it's there. It doesn't seem to me we're there yet.
Well, I mean, maybe a question is when you think about this does you look at sports. I mean, the question you ask some people is, okay, what sets you up better for the week? A Bengals big time win against the Ravens or the Steelers, or coming to church and seeing some people singing some songs you like and hearing a decent message? And I think if some people are honest, like, you know what's going to get me through this next week is a win against Pittsburgh more so than coming to church and hearing the word. Now, we would never answer that honestly because people look at us the same way. But I mean, when I was a kid, if growing up, I had there was two things I had going for me: being a Michigan fan and then being a Lions fan. And I was like, I didn't want to go 0 for 2 because if the Wolverines lost and my Lions lost, Monday at school, I was just like, my week's over. And so I was just counting down the next until they would win. And so growing up in Michigan, Michigan used to beat Ohio State all the time. That's when football was football. But if we would lose, half my friends loved Michigan State, but if they lose that game, it would like tank the next month. And so I'd have to wait till basketball season. And so, I mean, you look there, and sometimes I wonder of how big those things are for us. Does God have the same impact in our life? Like, we like what He provides us, but I think some of the things with it just goes to with people. The question is okay, what's more impactful, or what sets you up better for the week? Is it this or this?
I know, but okay, let's unpack that then, because I hear you, and I agree. I think some things are more exciting than the others. And I think the church for a long time, and again, just to make clear, we're not talking about Christ Church specifically. We're talking about just the Big C Church. This is the church in general, because it's everywhere. This situation is everywhere. I having a conversation with our children's director today, and she said, summer in Ohio goes all the way to the end of October. And her point was, when sports become part of the kids' lives, it doesn't end in the beginning of the school season. It goes all the way to the end of October. So when it comes to get volunteers, when it comes to church attendance, it's all impacted by the things that kids must do, being sports. So, I mean, that's, I think, what we got to like. If we're in a flip side of it, we are here asking the church, be in community. Be inside the community, influence people, connect with people. So again, how we reconcile this, because they're doing those things. They're being community. They're going to the Bengals game. They're going to their kids' sports game. They're going to whatever activities they got to go and do. But in because of those things, are every church in America Sunday morning is being impacted by
Yeah.
that. So let me just go ahead and drop the question.
Drop it.
Are we embracing the wrong church model for the current culture?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a pretty broad question. I mean, what would be the? I mean, what would you think of when you ask what's the model?
Well, I'm thinking, let's go back. Let's go back to Acts chapter 2, right?
Right.
When everything happened,
Right.
and for the moment, for that culture, you got to think of, in Jerusalem, all life was about religion. Everything was religion. Nothing else mattered. There was no sports that was more important than religion. There was no activities like they're in the temple every day. Like the governments of Israel, of Jerusalem, like back in that day, it was all surrounded around religion. So guess what? Every day I'm going to be in the temple. The man would go to the temple. Women was not even allowed in there, right?
Right.
But the life was based on being in a temple. And all of a sudden, Jesus comes to scene, and then the whole thing happened. He died on the cross. He resurrected. Holy Spirit comes, and there's a change now, because now they start meeting at homes, right? Because they're focusing on the community. They're focusing on the fellowship. They're still doing all those things, though. They're doing the fellowship. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings, right? It's kind of interesting. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings. They devoted themselves to the fellowship. They devoted themselves to prayer. They devoted themselves to breaking the bread. There's no reference in there, specific reference, that they had to do one of those things in a specific place, right?
Yeah. Well, no reference that they.
But culturally, they would go in a temple to do some of those things.
Well, I think like later on, Acts talks about Solomon's colonnade and
Yes.
stuff like. So they would go and meet there, but it was regardless of where they were at, they were still getting together and meeting. So it wasn't like specific,
Yeah,
cut and dry with it.
I know, right? So, but then you fast forward 2,000 years, and the culture is completely different. And I know that there's a battle out there for churches saying we should never allow the culture to dictate what the church would do. But my question is, if we don't understand today's culture, we're not going to be able to communicate the gospel. We cannot be able to. So, again, that's a big question. I mean, those are very big questions for us to unpack in just 40 minutes, 20 minutes. But I think that's where the conversation will land in terms of what is, and you're going to unpack this weekend about expectations. I don't want you to break
At least
the.
we hope I am.
But
Or
how
some of
that
it.
plays a role, like how we actually become the church we have to become in today's culture, because we're losing that fight. We can stand here Sunday all day long saying, hey, you're doing the wrong thing, come to church, drop the sports, drop everything and come to church. It's not working.
Yeah. Well, and I think the starting point with it is value. Like, so when you read all that stuff in Acts, I mean, God was just going full gains, which is a term around here for just Jumanji, or I mean, he was just unstoppable. And so, I mean, you had this, like, one of the things it talks about, like, people were trying to get in like when the apostles were walking, they're trying to get in their shadow because, like, if we're in the shadow of Peter as he walks by, we're going to be healed. And so, I mean, most people here, except for Matt James, most people here when we're walking, they try to avoid us. Matt, people flock to him like the Pope at the Vatican. And so when you look at that, I think it goes back to value. Like the community, you've seen an interesting community, Sundays down at Church at the Bar. there's a different value there because they're experiencing something that my guess would be, and tell me if I'm wrong with this, but that they didn't know they could experience because maybe they tried it in the traditional church environment and it just didn't go well. And it's not that they're opposed to God, but now they're able to cut through some of the proverbial tape a little bit.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, this is, I want this. It's beneficial to me, but it's something different. And so I think part of the stuff for us today, that's kind of what I was getting to earlier, is I just don't know if the value is, if people see the value with God and a relationship with Christ as they see other things. Because like you look now in this area with sports, man, why are sports on the weekend? It used to be the only people that played youth sports on the weekend, if they would schedule some stuff, but like for AAU is if you were legitimately good. Like now anyone can pay AAU if you pay enough money. So there's some kids that mom and dad think that they can do something, and they can't. But they pay enough money so they can be a part of these teams. And so there's like AAU is so watered down. It's like, no, listen, you're not legit.
You
AAU.
have authority on this because you've been coaching. Like you coach some teams, don't you? Like
that in
when you don't have talent, you don't have talent.
Yeah, and it's the classic example is the dad or whatever. It's like, okay, and some people offend. It's like, listen, dude, you got cut from varsity. You're trying to relive through your kids. And so it's like, hey, I'll shell out the money. I'll put them on the teams. It's like, no, man. If you can play, like you look at the NFL guys, a lot of these guys with their kids, they don't start them till later on because if you can play, you can play.
Yeah.
And there's certain kids that you can have them do all this stuff and, okay, they'll be decent. They can maybe play at a small level. It's like I played the lowest level of college basketball. I tried as hard as I can, but I'm not fast. I can't jump, and I wasn't super athletic. So guess what? 3 strikes, you're out. And so some of this stuff, with sports, but people are committed. Like, okay, if we do this stuff, they want the best for their kids, so they put them in these things. Because I think a question and talk about with that is that there's just it's where you find your value in, and maybe that's part of the conversation with how we do church. And because like you said, everything's changed, and I think with technology and all of that, like what you're getting at a little earlier, is that we don't, more like, hey, we don't want culture to dictate what we do, but we also have to figure out we don't want to be irrelevant in our culture.
There we go. Yeah. Well, let's be back and let's continue to talk about that. Let's see how technology can play a role in all these things here. We'll be right back. It's official. CC Life Plus has launched, and we truly feel blessed to be able to reach people in and through the new way of online living. What makes CC Life Plus even more special and better all around is that it is for everyone. This platform has kids content for students, podcasts, music, and traditional content to help you grow as Christians. So there really is something for everyone on here. We hope you have had a chance to check it out. If not, please do. We'll be adding new material monthly, and we'll post on the social media channels when we do, so make sure to subscribe and follow our social media channels so you know when new content is released. Okay, we're back. Hey, Brad, let's continue this conversation. You mentioned at the end of the last segment about technology, which is interesting. We're getting involved now into the metaverse VR church. Latest stats tells us that there's around over 90 billion. Sorry, that's a lot of people. That's more billion than Earth.
Man.
That's more billion than Earth. 90 million Americans on VR devices daily. 90 million daily. And I just got back from a trip and went to Chicago, visited a pastor friend of mine, and he is over 50, and he asked me about metaverse, and I'm thinking he's just wondering how this thing works. And we had a conversation, But then he's like, yeah, no, I have the device. I mean, he has the device. People are acquiring this Oculus and whatever else is there available. But people are going in, and I don't know how much you already got into it, but most of the people going in, they're not going in for gaming. They're going in for relationships, for connections. And I've been there several times. I post on social media my visits, walking around, meeting people. Again, here's another example of, that's totally unconventional way to be there. And guess what? Churches are now establishing their presence. In the last 6 months, attendance on VR church went up 500%. So again, it goes back to the conversation of, I think about Andy Stanley from North Point, and he says, marry the mission and date the model. And I think the conversation for us is like, yeah. Do you think we married the model? Do you think when we talk church, when you look at church in general, we're so convinced that the Sunday morning thing is what should happen, it's the way to do it, it's the only way that church should exist? Do you think we're too attached to it? And should we be? Should we continue to press that button?
I think that when you just look at things historically and the change that's gone on with it, is that I like that saying, what Stanley said, marry the mission, date the model. I think like with anything is, if you look throughout, it's fascinating to me that cell phones were around and people had them essentially certain people had them long before they became the norm. And so you look at for some people, they were late adopters with it. My dad, for years, I mean, it was like, hey, Fred Flintstone called, he wants his cell phone back. He's using the flip phone with it, and it's just slow to go there. And so I think that, I don't know if you'll ever move away, and I'll say it and it'll happen like 5 years, but I don't know if you'll ever move away completely from the Sunday morning model, because you look at the population of people that are used to it. But I think that at some point too, there's going to be, with what's happening as things are moving forward with technology, at some point too, there's going to be more change with it, because who's the church? I can't think of what Grochelle's church is, but aren't they?
Life Church.
Isn't Life Church predominantly online?
They have 9 campuses, I think, in person,
and they do a lot of.
And they do a lot online. I mean,
Yeah.
they have any given Sunday, it might be around 200,000 people watching on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, and so you look at as people are moving along. My guess would be some places because the trend we see, like, there's been a lot of churches that have closed with COVID.
Yeah.
There's a lot of churches that are still, I mean, the majority of churches in America are like 100 people or less.
Yeah.
That they're holding on, and I think the trend we'll see is probably the more common thing will be, you'll almost see a flip where you'll have, with these churches that have like 100 people now, these smaller ones, that I think with and I don't know a whole lot about the metaverse, I think you'll see more churches potentially in this VR realm and in the metaverse that are somewhat unique, that will have 50 to 100 people, because your overhead, all that stuff is not going to be there.
Yeah, you're right.
Moving forward in the future, that you'll have in your communities, your churches that meet on Sundays, that we're going to the building. We'll have, the next 5 to 10 years, we'll have a lot less than we do now, but they'll be larger. The people that are going there, they're going to be bought in. They'll be more effective in that. But you'll see a ton of, like, sometimes you go to some of these towns. The first church I was at in a town of, there's like 4,000 people around this area. And there was literally a church, a denomination on every corner. And you're like, there's not even enough people. Like, all these churches had like 50 people in them. but that the easy thing to do will be is you'll be able to go into from with technology. To me, that would make sense that it's coming there, and whether people want to run from it or not. And I mean, look at the whole the dating industry. If Lindsay and I are watching, if we're like streaming something, watching on Hulu, literally every other commercial break, there's they have commercials for I think it's like eHarmony or Match or something like that. And so you see these things where at first people, when those things first came up, people were like, I don't want to do this because I don't want to go online. And then you look now, and there used to be it used to be taboo to do that. You're like, well, if you do this stuff, people are going to say, well, they're going to look at you like, what? You can't talk to someone, you can't meet someone. And where now it's almost the norm. It's almost the preferred way to go, because you hear people say, I would rather go on here and find someone where the interests align. I don't want to waste my time going out and trying to meet someone. And so seeing how that's moved along, I don't know exactly what it would look like in the church. My guess would be you have a better idea, but I think more of that stuff's going to come into play.
Oh no, and I agree with you. I think you're right to the point. I think I know this is probably going to be a bold statement. It's just my personal opinion. I think the era of a mega church is gone. I think that the mega churches out there, they're going to hold on to dear life for a while. Mm-hmm. But it's a smaller community that's going to matter. That's why I think we're right on a spot here as a church by nonstop telling our people being community, because that's where it's at. So we are taking the approach of our church more distributed, more decentralized, and I think that becomes so important for people to actually, because if we're telling people being community, go being community then. But you don't have to stop being the church because you're being community. You don't have to stop. And that's, I think, where we have to disassociate some of those things that we do and bring back the fact that no matter where I am the church. And we've been talking about this for a very long time here. The idea that wherever I am, I'm the church. It's kind of interesting. We look at online ministries, which I do that a lot, and then now into Metaverse and VR Church, and we look at big numbers. People always crazy about the big numbers, right? It's a fast way to grow the church. Well, it's a fast way to grow your attendance. It's not the fastest way to grow the church, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, online ministry is still one-on-one. I'm not going to drive 15 people at once to go and get baptized one Sunday, because that's not happening in the in-person experience either in any church. But once I create a point of connection, in person, online, that's why we drive people into that point. That's where discipleship happens. VR is even more interesting because people create their own tribes, literally. Like there's 10 people that like, I really like the conversation we're having, they create their own tribes. Like they create their own groups. So the question is, do I rather have a church with 1 million people, or do I rather have 100,000 church with 10 people? And I think that is the question that pastors should ask themselves right now. Because 100,000 churches with 10 people, which much more distributed, and is much more, I think, community presence than one big church with 1 million people in it. They're meeting every Sunday. And I think, again, 1 million people church, you got much more financial capacity, right? You can do all the kinds of stuff. But 100,000 churches with 10 people is still a very large community if they're all going together to the same place, doing the same place in terms of mission. So I think missional church, relational discipleship, those are the things I think we should be pursuing, in person, online, VR, whatever that is, because it's all church. We can give all those names, and we got to give those names just to identify, the approaches. But at the end of the day, it's all church. right? So we're not trying to create a separation between those things, and one's the best, better than the other. I don't think the in-person experience of church is going to go away. I don't think it's going to go away. I think always going to be there until Jesus comes back. But I think there's going to be all these other options and availabilities for people to plug in and build community and have meaningful relationship with God and other people. And it's going to be much more distributed than centralized into one location. That's where we have to go get everything. Again, that's just my opinion, what I've seen things going in terms of a church that's more distributed and present in the community because that's where people are at.
Yeah, well, when you think about you go back to we started talking about the Bengals, and you see with these events or there was, I think, and Jeremy will correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think there was nearly 30,000 people a couple Saturdays ago down at Paul Brown Stadium for a practice, and people were excited. And I mean, how often do you find that a kicker is like one of the dogs of the team? And I think McPherson hit like a 65-yard field goal in practice, and people are going crazy. But you can't the people going to the games. I mean, people love that. But then there's some people, like they've said, statistics they've looked for is with a lot of your younger audience, like our kids. Sometimes for them, maybe there's a game they'll watch, but where we may watch I know you don't like American football, but where you may sit down and watch if Brazil's playing in the World Cup and they're playing for the title, you'll sit down there and watch the whole game. Like when we go to B-dubs, I mean, people are going in there and they're bringing like a flag placemat setting up. It's like, listen, your team's going to get rocked, but whatever. But where the kids, instead of watching the whole thing, they'll be like, I don't want to sit down there and watch the whole thing because on my phone, I'm just going to see the highlights that I need to see. And so it's understanding the differences. Or there's people that they love the Bengals, but they would rather sit and watch every game in their basement with maybe their group of friends or their community. And so I think, like you said, in the church, what's starting to come down, and I think what we're realizing, and whether we like it or not, COVID kind of just sped that process up, where for some people, like there's people at Church of the Bar that they love what's going on down there, that you've had baptisms down there, there's been transformation, that they'll never have this desire that, hey, I need to go to a traditional church building, because the relationships they've experienced God working in their life. And so if that's the place it happens, they're not going to change it.
It is, and I agree. I think it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. One of the key elements, I think, for the church today, and to understand culture, I think the sports illustration is so good because the same 30,000 people that went to the stadium and are passionate about Bengals, they're the same people that once they go to the bar after the training and they're in a much smaller environment with a much smaller group, that passion did not change.
Yeah.
That passion is still the same. And they don't need to know who's in the next table. They're sharing the same thing.
Yeah.
We gotta get church to be like that.
Yeah.
And by church, I mean people. Where's your passion for God, to the point that no matter where you are, you want to share with someone that maybe already is there with you, or somebody maybe they're not there. What happened when people like me? I'm not a sports fan. I'm not a football fan. When it comes just hearing the staff, people try and talk me into, no, you got to go to this team. You got to listen. You got to be Bengals fans. You live here. I mean, they're trying to preach the Bengals gospel to me every day and trying to convert me into, all those things. And it's no difference. There's nothing different than the church, than the one we believe in our spiritual life. I really don't. So I think the challenge for everybody is how we get there, how we turn our passion for God and His church into something that we want it to be contagious. We want it to celebrate and does not take away your passion for other things in your life. But definitely God takes priority. Again, that's what comes down to is it's God's the priority in your life. God's not asking you to abandon your favorite team. God's not asking you to abandon your community of friends. God's not telling you to do any of the. Actually, it's the opposite. God said, go out and love them. Go out and show them my love.
Yeah.
That's what God's telling us to do. But sometimes we just forget that. I think that's the process we got to bring everybody back in terms of love God, dedicate your life, devote. Acts chapter 2, devote yourself to it. The devotion is key, right? So how we devote ourselves to those things that drive our relationship with God to the point it needs to be, so then we can go to those places. We're going to go to the Bengals training camp. We're going to go to the bars. We're going to go to those places where people are not going to show people this is who we are in Christ. So that's my thought there on that, man.
I think it's a pretty good thought.
Well, I think we're going to close there because that's a good place for invitation and collect offering.
I mean, yeah, as I'm looking through the service, I mean, that's what's next in this podcast.
Exactly.
Got to pay the bills.
We're going to pass around the digital offering plate so people can drop their Bitcoins, and which is a thing now.
Yeah.
Is a thing now. So we think you should do it.
Yeah. Hopefully they didn't lose all their Bitcoins. But, yeah, we can get it done, and our producer would be happy about that.
I'm sure he will. Hey, he has always got a shopping list with he's going to the shopping list to the executive pastor like every 2 days. So he's becoming his favorite person.
Yeah, that is true. Always an item to be added.
Okay, good, dude. That was a good conversation. We'll be back next week, and let's keep talking.
Thanks for joining us this week on Let's Talk Podcast. Make sure to check us out at ccliveplus.com, where you can listen to past episodes and subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. And one more thing. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a rating on iTunes and tell someone about the show. Until next time.